The year was 2247, and Earth was no longer the isolated blue planet it once had been. It was now part of the Intergalactic Federation, a vast alliance of worlds and species bound together by treaties, trade, and diplomacy. Among these species were the Seraphans, a mysterious race known for their ethereal beauty, advanced psychic powers, and strict code of honor. The Seraphans were often viewed as distant and superior by others, believing themselves to be the guardians of order and wisdom. Their world was filled with shimmering crystal cities and floating gardens, where every detail of life was controlled by the Council of Elders. Discipline was everything, and breaking societal norms was punished severely. Reena, a young Seraphan woman, had always been different. From a young age, she questioned the Council's decisions, resisting the rigid structure of her life. Fascinated by stories of other worlds, especially Earth with its vibrant culture and diversity, her curiosity eventually led her to commit an act that changed her life forever. Reena used her psychic abilities to hack into restricted databases and study human culture, a serious crime for a Seraphan. The Council prided itself on keeping their people's minds pure, free from the lesser species' influence. When her actions were discovered, she was brought before the Council to face judgment. The Council's chambers were a vast, echoing hall made of gleaming crystal, filled with an ethereal light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The elders, towering figures in flowing robes with glowing eyes, sat in a semicircle around Reena, their expressions cold and unforgiving. Reena of House Vala, the head of the Council, intoned, his voice resonating like distant thunder. "You stand accused of violating our sacred laws. You have allowed yourself to be tainted by the ways of a primitive species. Do you deny these charges?" Reena stood tall, her violet eyes meeting the elder's gaze without flinching. "I do not deny it, elder, but I do not regret it either. How can we claim to be the guardians of knowledge if we refuse to understand the cultures of those we consider beneath us? The humans are not what we think." A murmur of shock swept through the Council. No one had ever spoken so boldly in their presence. The head elder's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. "You have defied our laws and brought dishonor to your house. Your punishment must be severe, to serve as a warning to others." Reena's heart pounded as she awaited her sentence. Exile? Imprisonment? She had prepared herself for these possibilities. But what came next was beyond anything she could imagine. "You will be stripped of your status, your power suppressed, and you will be sent to Earth," the elder announced. "There, you will be given as a slave to a human, to serve as a reminder of the consequences of defiance. You will remain there until you have learned humility." The words hit Reena like a physical blow, a slave to a human. For any Seraphan, this was a fate worse than death. But the Council's decision was final. She had no choice but to accept her punishment. The journey to Earth was a blur of pain and humiliation. The Council's enforcers fitted her with a device that dampened her psychic abilities, leaving her powerless. She was placed in a stasis pod and transported to a remote human colony on the edge of the Federation. Her new owner was a man named Mark, an engineer who lived alone on a small farm. When Reena's stasis pod landed in the dusty yard, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Mark was in his late 20s, lean with a face weathered from hard work. When the pod opened, Reena stepped out, her silver hair catching the fading light. She moved gracefully, despite the weight of the control device around her neck. Her violet eyes scanned the primitive farm with curiosity and disdain. Mark stared at her, speechless. He had been told he would receive a gift from the Seraphans, but had not expected this. "I am Reena," she said, her voice cold. "I've been sent as your slave." Mark frowned. "Slave?" he repeated, shaking his head. "That's not happening. I don't care what they say. I'm not keeping you as a slave." Reena looked at him in surprise. "You would defy your own government." Mark shrugged. "I didn't ask for this, and I don't agree with it. You're free to leave whenever you want." Reena's eyes narrowed. "And where would I go? The Council made sure I cannot leave this place. Even if I could, Where would I go on a world that is not my own? Mark sighed, realizing she was right. Well, you're welcome to stay here as long as you like. I've got an extra room. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to. Reena didn't respond immediately. She had expected cruelty, indifference, or at best, begrudging acceptance. But this human was offering her kindness, something she hadn't anticipated. It left her feeling off balance for the first time since her sentence was given. She wasn't sure what to do. "Thank you," she said finally, the words sounding strange on her lips. Gratitude was not something Seraphans often expressed, especially not to humans. Mark nodded, giving her a small, lopsided smile. "No problem. I'm Mark, by the way. Guess we'll begin to know each other." "Huh?" Reena simply nodded, not trusting herself to say more. She followed him into the small farmhouse, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. This wasn't what she had expected, and it certainly wasn't what she wanted. But for now, she had no choice but to accept her fate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the farm in deep shadows, Reena found herself in a strange new world, bound to a man she knew nothing about. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. The days after Reena's arrival at Mark's farm passed in a blur of new experiences and clashing emotions. Earth was a world unlike anything she had ever known, untamed, raw, and vibrant. The air was thick with the scent of earth and plants, the sky a vast, ever-changing canvas that stretched beyond the horizon. It was all so different, so alien, yet oddly captivating. Despite the initial tension between them, Mark and Reena began to settle into a tentative routine. Mark rose early each morning to tend to his crops and maintain the machines that kept the farm running. Reena, still grappling with her new reality, often watched him from a distance, studying his movements and trying to understand the strange human who had shown her unexpected kindness. At first, Reena found herself at odds with the simplicity of life on Earth. The chores, the physical labor, the lack of advanced technology. Everything felt primitive to her. On Seraphia, tasks were handled with psychic powers or sophisticated machines. Here, everything was done by hand, and the work was hard. Mark had offered her the freedom to do as she pleased, but with no clear path back to Seraphia and little knowledge of human society, Reena reluctantly began helping out around the farm. Mark was patient with her. He didn't push her to do anything she wasn't comfortable with, taking time to explain how things worked on Earth. He showed her how to repair the farm's irrigation system, how to tell when crops were ready for harvest, and even how to cook simple meals. Though she was initially resistant, Reena couldn't help but be intrigued by the hands-on nature of it all. There was something satisfying about the tangible results of their efforts, a satisfaction she had never experienced in the controlled environment of Seraphia. Despite the growing camaraderie between them, Reena couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. The control device around her neck was a constant reminder of her imprisonment. Though it didn't physically restrain her, it dampened her psychic abilities, leaving her powerless to communicate with her people or manipulate her surroundings as she once could. Being bound to a human, no matter how kind, was an affront to her pride and everything she had been taught. As the weeks passed, Reena's frustration grew. She spent long hours wandering the outskirts of the farm, trying to find a way to disable the control device. The more she learned about human technology, the more she realized how primitive it was compared to Seraphian standards. The device was designed to be nearly indestructible by anything Earth had to offer, a failsafe to ensure no Seraphian could easily break free from their punishment. But Reena was nothing if not resourceful. She began covertly studying the device, using what little knowledge she had left of Seraphian technology. She knew that if she could find the right frequency, the device could be deactivated, at least temporarily. But without her full powers, finding that frequency was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, her interactions with Mark became increasingly complex. At first, she had seen him as nothing more than her captor, albeit a kind one. But as they spent more time together, She began to see him differently. Mark was unlike any Seraphian she had ever known. He was patient, kind, and possessed a quiet strength she hadn't expected. He didn't treat her like a slave or a subordinate, but as an equal, something she had never experienced on Seraphia. One evening, after a long day of work, Mark and Reena sat together on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. The air was cool and filled with the chirping of nocturnal insects. Mark handed her a cup of herbal tea, a custom he had introduced her to, and one she had surprisingly come to enjoy. "Do you miss it?" Mark asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "You're home, I mean." Reena looked out at the moons, their pale light reflecting in her violet eyes. "Every day," she admitted. "It's everything I've ever known. The beauty, the order, the power. It's hard to be away from it, but there were things I didn't realize I was missing until I came here." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "I can't imagine what it's like for you, being forced to leave everything behind like that. But I'm glad you're here, Reena. I know it's not what you wanted, but I've enjoyed getting to know you." Reena glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You're different from what I expected," she said quietly. "Humans, we were taught to see you as inferior, driven by emotion and chaos. But you're not like that. You're kind." Mark chuckled softly. "Not sure if that's a compliment or not, but I'll take it. I guess we're not all that different, really. We both have things we care about, things we're willing to fight for." Reena nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what those things were for her anymore. Her desire for freedom was still strong, but the more time she spent with Mark, the more she questioned what freedom truly meant. Was it just the ability to return to Seraphia, or was it something deeper? As the days turned into weeks, Reena continued trying to disable the control device, but now with a sense of uncertainty. Part of her longed to return to Seraphia, to confront the council and reclaim her status. But another part of her had grown attached to the simple, honest life she was building with Mark. The thought of leaving him behind filled her with a strange sense of loss, something she had never expected to feel for a human. One afternoon, while Mark was out repairing one of the farm's solar panels, Reena finally had a breakthrough. She had been experimenting with different frequencies, using an old radio transmitter she found in the barn. After hours of trial and error, she found the right frequency. The control device gave a soft beep and powered down. For a moment, Reena stood in stunned silence, hardly able to believe what she had accomplished. She was free. The dampening effect was gone, and her psychic abilities were returning, like a dam bursting after being held back too long. She could reach out to Seraphia, contact her people, and finally find a way home. But as she prepared to make the call, something stopped her. A feeling she couldn't quite place, a weight in her chest that made her hesitate. She looked out at the fields where Mark was working, unaware of what she had just achieved. Reena realized that leaving wasn't as simple as she thought. She had come to care for Mark more than she wanted to admit. He had shown her a different side of humanity, one she hadn't expected and couldn't ignore. The idea of leaving him behind, of never seeing him again, filled her with dread. She was faced with an impossible choice: to return to the life she had known, reclaim her place among the Seraphans, or stay on Earth with Mark in a world still foreign to her, but one that had become strangely comforting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the farm, Reena knew she had to make a decision. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what the right choice was. The struggle for freedom, she realized, was not just about escaping her physical bonds, but about finding where she truly belonged. And that was a journey she hadn't yet completed. The morning after Reena deactivated the control device, she woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The power she had once taken for granted now surged through her veins, filling her with strength and clarity. She could feel the vast network of Seraphian minds at the edge of her consciousness, waiting for her to reach out. And yet, the decision weighed heavily on her. Mark was in the kitchen when she entered, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the small farmhouse. He greeted her with a warm smile, his usual morning routine in full swing. Reena watched him for a moment, a pang of guilt twisting in her chest. She had the power to leave now, to return to the life she had known. But doing so would mean abandoning Mark, the man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, even when he had no obligation to. "Morning, Reena," Mark said, handing her a mug of tea, a habit she had picked up during her time on Earth. "Sleep well." "Well enough," she replied, accepting the mug. She hesitated, then added, "Mark, I need to talk to you about something important." Mark set down his coffee and turned to face her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's on your mind?" Reena took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I managed to disable the control device last night. My powers are back." Mark's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment he didn't say anything. "You did? That's amazing, Reena." There was a pause, a flicker of something in his expression that Reena couldn't quite place. "So, what now?" "That's what I've been thinking about," she admitted, staring into her mug. "I can contact Seraphia now. I could ask for a ship to take me back, explain everything that happened, and try to clear my name." Mark nodded slowly, his expression carefully neutral. But... Reena hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "If I go back, it means leaving everything here behind. It means leaving you behind." Mark looked at her, his eyes searching her face before he spoke. "Reena, you don't owe me anything. If going back is what you need to do, then I won't try to stop you. You deserve to be free, to have your life back." Reena could hear the sincerity in his voice, but also the underlying sadness. She had come to know Mark well enough to recognize that he wasn't just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. He truly believed she should make the choice that was best for her, even if it meant losing her. "That's the thing, Mark," she said softly. "I'm not sure what I want anymore. I thought I knew, but now I'm not so sure." Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he sighed. "Look, Reena, I don't know much about Seraphans or your world, but I do know that you've changed since you got here. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you found something here you didn't expect. But whatever you decide, I'll support you." Reena felt a rush of emotion at his words, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge until now. She reached out and took his hand, holding it tightly. "Thank you, Mark. That means more to me than you know." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Finally, Reena stood up, her resolve hardening. "I need to go back, at least for a little while. I need to confront the council and make them understand what I've learned here. But I want you to come with me." Mark blinked in surprise. "Me? To Seraphia?" "Yes," Reena said, her voice firm. "They need to see that humans aren't what they think. There's more to your kind than they've ever acknowledged. And I need you there with me to show them what I've seen." Mark considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right, if that's what you want, then I'll go with you. But are you sure they'll let me? I mean, I'm just a human." "I'll make sure they do," Reena said, determination burning in her eyes. "It's time for things to change. And I won't let them dismiss you or your people anymore." With the decision made, Reena wasted no time. She reached out with her mind, sending a signal to the Seraphan network, announcing her presence and requesting an audience with the council. The response was immediate. A ship would be sent to retrieve her and her companion as soon as possible. The council's tone was formal, almost cold, but they couldn't hide their surprise that Reena had managed to restore her powers and contact them. The days leading up to the ship's arrival were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation. Reena and Mark prepared for the journey, packing what little they would need and making arrangements for the farm in their absence. Reena had spent time learning more about Earth's history and culture, so she could better explain it to the council. In return, she shared more about Seraphia's rigid societal structure with Mark, preparing him for the cold reception he might face. Finally, the day arrived. The Seraphian ship descended from the sky in a blaze of light, its sleek, crystalline structure hovering just above the ground. Reena felt a pang of nostalgia as she saw it, a reminder of the life she had left behind in the world she was about to re-enter. Mark stood beside her, his face calm and determined. "Are you ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Reena replied, taking a deep breath. Together, they stepped forward, ascending the ship's ramp and into its cool, sterile interior. The journey to Seraphia was short, but it felt like an eternity. Reena's mind raced as she tried to anticipate how the council would react, what arguments she would make, and how she could convince them to see things differently. Mark seemed deep in thought too, though he occasionally offered her a reassuring smile. When they finally arrived on Seraphia, Reena was struck by how alien it felt. The crystal towers and floating gardens that had once been her home now seemed distant and cold, lacking the warmth and life she had come to associate with Earth. The streets were filled with Seraphians going about their business, their expressions serene and detached, completely unaware of the turmoil she was feeling. The council chambers were exactly as she remembered them, vast, echoing halls of gleaming crystal filled with an ethereal light. The elders were already assembled, towering figures watching as Reena and Mark entered. A palpable tension hung in the air. "Reena of House Vala," the head elder intoned, his voice resonating through the chamber. "You have returned, as we knew you would, but you bring with you a human. Explain yourself." Reena stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Elders, I have returned not as a slave, but as a Seraphian who has learned the truth. You sent me to Earth as a punishment, to break my spirit and force me to submit. But instead, I found something unexpected: understanding, compassion, and a deeper connection than I ever thought possible." The elders murmured among themselves, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. The head elder raised a hand to silence them. "You speak of compassion and connection with a human, but what does this human have to do with us?" Mark stepped forward, his voice steady but respectful. "I'm here because Reena asked me to be. I know you see humans as lesser beings, but we're more than what you think. We have our flaws, sure, but we also have our strengths, our capacity for empathy, for love, and for growth. Reena saw that in me, and I've seen it in her. She's not the same person who left Seraphia." The elders exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by Mark's words. The head elder narrowed his eyes, focusing on Reena. "You claim to have changed, Reena of House Vala, but how can we trust the word of one who has defied our laws and consorted with a lesser species?" Reena felt a surge of anger at the elder's words, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I understand your doubts, elder, but I ask you to listen to what I have to say. We have lived in isolation for too long, believing ourselves to be superior to other species. That isolation has blinded us to the truth, that we are not as different as we think. By embracing our shared humanity, we can grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate." A long, heavy silence filled the chamber as the elders considered her words. Reena could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the internal struggle between their ingrained beliefs and the possibility that she might be right. Finally, the head elder spoke. "Your words are bold, Reena of House Vala, but words alone are not enough to change the course of our society. We will consider what you have said and deliberate on the matter." Reena bowed her head, accepting their decision. She knew this was only the beginning. True change would take time and effort, but she had planted a seed of doubt in their minds, and that was enough for now. As they left the council chambers, Mark turned to her with a faint smile. "That went better than I expected." Reena nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "It's not over yet, but it's a start. Thank you for being here, Mark. I couldn't have done this without you." Mark squeezed her hand gently. "You're stronger than you think, Reena. I'm just glad I could be here to help." Together, they walked through the crystal streets of Seraphia, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. Reena knew the road ahead would be difficult, with resistance and challenges to overcome. But she also knew she wasn't alone in this fight. Mark was by her side, and together, They could face whatever came their way. As they reached the edge of the city, where the crystalline structures gave way to open fields and endless skies, Reena paused to look back at the place she had once called home. It felt different now, smaller, less imposing. For the first time, she realized that home wasn't a place. It was a feeling, a sense of belonging she had found not in the structures of Seraphia, but in the heart of a human who had shown her the true meaning of compassion. "Are you ready to go back?" Mark asked, his voice gentle. Reena smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "Yes," she said, taking his hand. "Let's go home." And with that, they turned away from the Crystal City, stepping into the future they would build together. A future where love and understanding could bridge the gaps between worlds. The journey back to Earth was bittersweet for Reena. As the Seraphian ship cut through the starry expanse, she reflected on everything that had led her to this point. The meeting with the Council had gone better than she could have hoped, but uncertainty about the future weighed heavily on her mind. She knew that change, if it came, would be slow and met with resistance. Still, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. She had spoken her truth, and the Council had listened, more than she could have expected. Mark sat beside her in the ship's quiet cabin, gazing out at the stars. The tension that had built over the past few days seemed to have eased, and there was a calm between them now. Reena turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dim light. She had grown so much in such a short time, and much of that growth was because of him. He had shown her a side of humanity she had never known, a side capable of deep compassion, understanding, and love. "What are you thinking about?" Mark asked, turning to meet her gaze. "Everything," Reena replied with a soft smile. "It's strange. When I was sent to Earth, I was so angry," Reena began. "I thought being sent to Earth was the worst thing that could happen to me, but now I'm not so sure. I've learned so much from you, Mark. More than I ever thought possible." Mark smiled warmly at her. "I'm glad, Reena. You've taught me a lot, too. I never imagined I'd be standing before an alien council, trying to convince them that humans are worth something. But you believed in me, and that gave me the courage to speak up." Reena reached out and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "You're more than worth something, Mark. You're everything to me." There was a moment of silence as the weight of her words hung in the air. Mark's expression softened, and he gently squeezed her hand. "You're everything to me too, Reena. I never thought I'd find someone like you, let alone fall in love with you." Reena's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had been so focused on her mission and her quest for freedom that she hadn't fully acknowledged the feelings that had been growing inside her. But now, in this quiet moment, with the stars as their only witnesses, she couldn't deny it any longer. "I love you, Mark," she whispered. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." Mark smiled, his face lighting up. "I love you too, Reena. We'll figure it out together." The ship continued its silent journey through the cosmos, carrying them back to Earth and the life they had begun building together. When they finally arrived, it was late at night, the stars shining brightly over the small farm that had become their home. The Seraphian ship landed softly in the field, its engines humming quietly as the ramp lowered. Reena and Mark stepped out into the cool night air, their hands still intertwined. The farm looked the same as it had when they left, but to Reena, it felt different, more familiar, more welcoming. This was where she belonged now, not just because it was Earth, but because Mark was here. As they walked toward the farmhouse, Reena felt a deep sense of peace. The journey she had started with so much anger and resentment had led her to a place she could never have imagined. She had found love, not just for Mark, but for the life they had created together. They spent the next few days settling back into their routine, but there was a new ease between them, a shared purpose. Reena used her powers sparingly, knowing that the council would be watching, but she no longer felt the need to hide who she was. Mark encouraged her to explore her abilities, to find new ways to integrate them into their life on Earth. Together, they worked to improve the farm, using both human ingenuity and Seraphian technology to make it more efficient and sustainable. News of Reena's visit to the council slowly spread through the galaxy. Other Seraphians who had been exiled began to reach out, curious about her experience and eager to learn more. Reena found herself in a new role, not just as a former exile, but as a bridge between two worlds. She began corresponding with these Seraphians, sharing her knowledge and encouraging them to see the value in the connections they had made with other species. Mark was always by her side, offering support and helping her navigate the complexities of her new life. They grew closer with each passing day, their bond deepening as they faced the challenges of building a life together. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Mark turned to Reena with a thoughtful expression. "Reena, there's something I've been thinking about," he began, his voice tentative. "What is it?" Reena asked, curious. Mark took a deep breath and pulled a small, intricately carved wooden box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring, the band gleaming in the fading light. "I know our lives are complicated, and there's still so much we don't know about the future. But I also know that I want to spend that future with you, no matter what. Reena, will you marry me?" Reena's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the ring, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never imagined this moment. But now that it was here, she knew with absolute certainty what her answer would be. "Yes, Mark," she whispered, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Yes, I will marry you." Mark's face broke into a wide grin as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into gentle twilight. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended by the friends and neighbors they had come to know. It was a simple ceremony held in the open field behind the farmhouse, with the stars shining brightly above them. Reena wore a dress made from the finest Seraphian silk, its shimmering fabric catching the light in a way that made her seem almost otherworldly. Mark wore a simple suit, his eyes never leaving Reena as they exchanged vows. As they stood together, hand in hand, Reena couldn't help but think of how far they had come. The girl who had been sent to Earth as punishment was gone, replaced by a woman who had found love, purpose, and a new sense of belonging. And the man who had once lived alone on a remote farm had found a partner who had shown him a world beyond his wildest dreams. When they finally kissed, sealing their vows under the watchful gaze of the stars, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. A chapter filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future they would build together. As the years passed, Reena and Mark continued to grow their farm, integrating more Seraphian technology into their work. They became a symbol of unity and cooperation between their two worlds, a living testament to the power of love and understanding. Reena's correspondence with other Seraphians grew into a network of like-minded individuals who sought to bridge the gaps between their people and the rest of the galaxy. Together, Reena and Mark faced the challenges that came their way, always knowing they were stronger together. Their love, forged in the crucible of adversity, became a beacon of hope for others, showing that even the most unlikely unions could flourish with patience, respect, and understanding. In the end, Reena realized that her true home wasn't a place, it was a person, a man who had shown her the beauty of living with an open heart. And as they stood together, watching their children play in the fields they had nurtured with love and care, Reena knew that she had finally found the freedom she had been searching for all along. The freedom to be herself, to love without fear, and to build a life filled with meaning and joy. In that freedom, she had found her forever.